one of the things that I've been trying to do, of course, as you will clearly see, is convince you all that you should know something about this two-arrow shared paradigm thing. And so I have cleverly, without your knowledge, shown it to you at the beginning of each class to both remind you of it and also to show you what we're talking about each class. So this time, what we're talking about is supporting innovation. Until this point, as you know, we've talked about user pioneering, we've talked about collaboration with Viviana last time, we've talked about free diffusion with Erdine, we've talked about innovation designs turning into entrepreneurship things. So this now is, well, wait a minute. Companies start to say, you know what? If this user innovation, this free innovation is providing us with an enormously valuable service, namely new prototype products we can commercialize, we ought to support it. And we ought to support it in a way, says a company, because that's what companies do, that somehow makes it attractive to people to work on the problems and the products that we care about. So what you'll see there is a form of innovation support is something called innovation toolkits, where basically what the company does is give people sets of tools that they can use to create products that were based upon the manufacturer's products or something else. And then also free groups like Linux and so on, they supply a ton of tools to enable not necessarily skilled users to go ahead and develop something they otherwise wouldn't. Okay? So now I wish there was a way to move this. There is. So the first thing to think about is that users know some things and manufacturers know other things. And both of these types of things must be brought together to actually successfully develop a new solution. So obviously, as we know, product users have needs, personal needs, company needs, and they have a system of use information. That is, they know what they're trying to do in large. So if the person there who's a kite surfer is saying, well, I need a change to my board, that person also knows all the related things he or she is trying to do that requires that change and therefore informs that change. So you can see here, you know, maybe the guy is trying to do a flip or something like that, and sort of uses muscles and everything else to try to achieve this and says, darn it, that board just isn't doing what it should do. Now, on the other side, what you've got is people making boards. And those people are not necessarily kite surfers. They're people who know a bunch about how to produce a board out of carbon fiber or whatever it might be. And what you see there on the left is a sort of a press to actually shape and compress a board and cure it out of plastic materials. So they know different things. And the thing that, let's see how I can, oops. The thing that, that we must think about is how to get those two things, those two types of information together so that one solver can act on it. Now, one more thing that you should be aware of here that makes it a complicated decision as to who you pass the information to, whether it's a manufacturer or a user. So basically, sometimes information is very sticky. It may be something that is something that the kite surfer knows, but it's very sticky. It's hard, that means, to transfer information from a user to a producer, like how to make my windsurfing windsurfing board flip better, right? And sometimes it's very easy to transfer that need information. Like, listen, all I want is you to make my electric motor more energy efficient. That's all. Let it keep turning as it's turning. I just want it to be more energy efficient. So what we find is that because somehow it is so darn difficult sometimes to transfer sticky information to the producer site, which is the normal assumption of market research. It's just sometimes so hard to do that you have to instead transfer the innovation activity to the site of sticky information. So here on the top, we say, well, if it's easy to transfer information on make a motor sort of more energy efficient to a producer, great. The producer has the harder job. It has all these kinds of things it knows about how to wind electric motors and manufacture them and all the rest. So let's tell them what we want. Traditional market research, what do you want, says the manufacturer. Okay, we can do that. Now, where we get into trouble is the kind of thing that you see here, where somebody has very sticky information, a user. Well, I'm trying to flip this thing upside down and I don't quite know everything that I'm doing, and therefore I can't tell the manufacturer what I'm doing. So maybe if the manufacturer gives me a toolkit to fiddle around with the kite design or the board design, I can figure it out for myself without necessarily fully even understanding my own need consciously. Now, studies show this effect, but I want it right now, so you get a sense of this, to jump into a discussion question with the breakout group. Because I think you'll be surprised and then you'll appreciate what a toolkit is valuable for. So I propose you think of something that you know well, right? Like you know how to ride a bicycle. But then try to think about whether you can transfer that information to somebody else. So for example, most of you know how to ride a bike well, but can you tell someone else how to do it? It was so funny because when my kids were growing up and I was teaching them how to ride a bicycle, and I know how to ride a bicycle, I would give them useless information, right? I would put them on the bike and then sort of run alongside them and let them go. I wasn't teaching them how to ride a bike. They were teaching themselves. I was creating the condition. And meanwhile, I was yelling useless things like, don't fall down, right? Or keep pedaling, or something like that. Now, when you think about it, that's quite amazing. I cannot tell somebody the principles that I use to ride a bike so that that person can then unpack them and use them. I can't say to the kid, well, you know, when you're turning a corner, your center of gravity changes and you have to lean. It's like, what? No, that kid just starts to do it. So what I propose you do is, and maybe let's see if this is useful to you. Let's try 10 minutes. Come up with something that you know how to do well, and imagine now that you're trying to tell a marketer what you want and need. Because basically, the assumption in marketing research is that they can understand what you're trying to do, so that they, in turn, apart from you, can develop a solution that you will then find useful, right? So let's try this for 10 minutes, Jane. Think of something you know well, and think about whether you could really transfer the information, and think about the difference. What makes it hard and what makes it easy? Some things will be easy, like that electric motor. Yeah, I can tell you about that. Other things will be hard. Okay, so let's try it. Any quick comments from anybody, or are we rolling along reasonably well? Jane, do you see anything, or shall I? I'll just go ahead, shall I?
I
Eric,
was just,
oh,
no, go ahead, Erdine.
we
Go ahead.
we had some really good examples in our group. Perhaps if would you
Yeah.
like to proceed, or would you be okay with hearing an example?
Sure, of course.
Perhaps we could start with Asim's, who had an example from learning to fly a plane. Asim, would you come in live? That was pretty good.
Oh, absolutely. So what we were talking about, obviously the thought was, the sticky information, which is hard to pass along. And the example that I was giving was that I am a pilot on the side as a hobby. And one of the most basic skills when you fly an airplane is landing the airplane. Now, without any wind, without any crosswind, it's very easy to land an aircraft, right? I mean, it's a most basic thing. But where it becomes a sticky information for the instructor to pass to the student is when the crosswinds come in, right? When the winds come from the right or from the left, the instructions are given, right? I mean, if the wind is coming from the left, dip your wing to the left, put your nose to the right. I mean, that's it. But in practice, it's extremely difficult to do it. So the marketing people, the instructors, who are the ones who are conveying this, it becomes extremely difficult for them to convey unless you do it 50, 60 times. The student does it practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the example that I was sharing, that in this case, the sticky information, which is kind of evident what it is, but still very difficult to pass unless you do it like 40, 50 times, and then it becomes okay, it becomes a muscle memory after a while.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Thank you. And it's interesting because the student couldn't either, or the reason it's so hard is there's a lot of tacit or skill, muscle-based kinds of skills involved in it, I guess. Right?
That's right. Yes, and that only comes with practice.
Yeah, thanks. Erdine, was there somebody else, or should we go ahead, or what would you like?
If you think we have time, I would nominate Leslie, who undertook a new hobby recently, and
Sure.
she had to deal with the challenge of extracting sticky information. So Leslie, perhaps you could offer your example to all of us.
Yeah, so recently I started weaving on a loom, just like a fun quarantine activity, I guess. And something I thought was funny that the instruction manual wasn't much of a instruction manual. It was more of a sort of instruction to go to the company's YouTube page and watch their tutorial videos on how to get started. I think it was an acknowledgement of a fact that it's really difficult to pass along knowledge of a technique specifically through just like words or even pictures. Rather, it's like sort of watching someone on how they do something and learning that way is what tends to be most effective on passing on information.
Yeah, great. That's an excellent example. Thank you. All right, Erdine, maybe I'll go ahead now.
Sounds great.
Okay, so let's see here. So basically, let me flick ahead one. Here's the idea then of toolkits. You remember I told you a minute ago that, well, if the information is easy to transfer to a manufacturer that's needed for a new product, then the manufacturer gets that information and does it. If it's hard, what you have to do is figure out some way to get the design information to the user instead. So here is the basic principle of the thing. Traditionally, if you look on the left, it's always been about find a need and fill it. In other words, we as manufacturers look at you, whether we study ethnography or whatever, we look at you and we try to understand what you want, and then we try to do it for you. Now, sometimes, if you think about, for instance, Travelocity or a firm like that, sometimes what we have is in our lifetimes a transition that shows us both ways of doing something. So earlier, there were travel agents. There's still some, but there were travel agents. And anybody who needed an airplane flight would call up the travel agent. And the travel agent was sitting there with known information. Sitting there, he knew the flights, he knew the fares and the times of the flights and so on and so forth. And each person would call in and say, well, I want to go here, but you know what? Maybe I also want to visit my uncle in Des Moines on the way, and so on and so forth. And all sorts of, in other words, local, evoked, and partially presented information around the trip. And then the supplier, the travel agent, is spending that person's time trying to figure out what each person wants and recommend a flight. Now, as soon as it became possible on the internet and so on, what happened was this standard model was reversed, and you see that on the right-hand side. What happened on the right-hand side was the supplier realized that every user wanted standard information from the supplier, namely wanted the flights and the times of the flights and the fares and all the rest of that kind of thing, and that this could be provided in a database form that was easily accessible by the user. Now, that was a big investment to make it easily accessible. Before, it had all been sort of jargon and complex kinds of databases put out by airlines that weren't easy to read and the rest of it. But that's what you do now. Now, why do you do that? In this case, you've decided, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back one. You've decided that it's more efficient to use the complicated information that each user has about trip preferences in the user locus. You don't want to transfer it to the producer, the supplier, in this case, Travelocity, but it's cheap since the supplier only has to once convert all the standard information that each of these different customers will want. And so the supplier does that, and what you now have is, in effect, the solving of the what flight do I want and when do I want it and where do I want to go has been transferred to the user site. Now, what the supplier then did was what we are calling giving a toolkit to the users. What the supplier did was say, I'm going to give you an easy way to figure out your flights using your own information, your own preference information and pricing information and all the rest of it. I'm going to find an easy way for you to do that yourself. And I'll give you the tools to do it. So consider now the case of integrated circuits. What I'm going to do is tell you basically that this is a common phenomenon, and then I'm going to end up later in this class asking you all to think of applying these concepts to a market that you know well or a product type that you know well, okay? So historically, because user information is sticky, firms often cannot afford to develop custom products for smaller customers. They can't afford to do what the travel agent used to do, because you need sophisticated engineers, not just travel agent skills, to figure out what a particular customer wants in, for example, the case of integrated circuits, and that's very costly. So what happened was, in the case of the early integrated circuit field, what happened was they either made standard circuits, or if you wanted a custom circuit, you had to order some millions of them to justify the cost. And the rest of the market, potential customers, simply was not served. Now, along came a firm named LSI, because these producer firms were getting besieged by, for God's sakes, design something for us. We need a circuit that is a custom circuit for our product. So what LSI did is they said, you know what? We're going to give you the design tools. We're going to give you sort of easier to use design tools that are also used by our engineers in-house. And what you see there on those two arrows again is we are going to transfer, that's the arrow in red, we are going to transfer to you tools to enable you to design your own circuits. Now, this is a fabulous deal from the perspective of custom semiconductor makers because they're transferring some of the effort to you. They're saying, in the end, you have to make it in our semiconductor fab anyway. So by transferring some of the design work to you, just like those customers for airplane flights, you know what you want. You can iterate and fiddle around until you get it just right, and then we will build it for you. It's the same principle as was used in the early supermarkets. It used to be that stores that sold groceries would have a front counter, and you would go to the front counter with a list, and they would go back into their warehouse shelves and fill a list for you and bring it back. The idea of a supermarket was, no, you take on that task as well. You go get the food, and then we'll put it in a bag for you and you can pay for it. In other words, we're not giving you a way around what we do or what we want to charge for. We're giving you a way to take on some of the burden. Now, why would a customer want to do that? It turned out they really did, because they really could not express exactly what they wanted to the manufacturer in the first place. So very often what happened is they would ask for something, it would be manufactured to their spec, and then it would be wrong. So they wanted a toolkit to actually work within their own environment and then come up with exactly the right product before even manufacturing it. Same with the customers in a supermarket. They would wander around. They didn't have a list that was perfect in the beginning. They would look at things and they would say, oh, I guess I do want some pasta. And they would throw it in to their bag because they were directly exposed to what, in a sense, the supplier could give them, and ended up with a list of ingredients that they bought that was more to their satisfaction. Now, what did this do? This actually enabled many more people to build custom integrated circuits. And it was fabulous for the manufacturers of these circuits. They got thousands of customers doing their own designs, and then they would run their silicon fabs and charge for these. And this happened once more. Field programmable. Now you can design your own chips at home for about $50 worth of equipment. And so suddenly, everybody could make their own chips, and the manufacturers sold many, many more chips. So it was a good economic decision to transfer via a toolkit what the customer needed to develop for themselves a new product that you would then manufacture. Now, what I'm going to do is give you some more examples. This is, again, in 2004 that Verilog and hackers and so on were discovering that it only took about $50 worth of equipment to develop their own ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. Now, today, you know, and I showed you earlier, toolkits are increasingly being provided to ordinary customers with ordinary skills. So we see in the case of games that a producer sells, they give to users of these video games tools to modify the games. And they find very satisfied customers as a result. They're sharing the innovation process with the customer by giving the customer tools. The customer then designs things. The company benefits again because it says, hey, we can manufacture, we can see what you're doing. You know, you're on our website. We can see what you're doing. And when we see something that a lot of people want, wow, we can embody that in our existing product. So we can get you to design based on your sticky information, things we could not design for you. And then we can go ahead and manufacture them. So it's a good deal for both sides. Now, let's see if I go down. I don't know why that's doing that. Now, so how do you design a toolkit then? There are two major tasks, and they're both really interesting to both help you understand the principles and to help you also sort of get into the final discussion question, which is to think about how you might design a toolkit for an area that you know. So the first thing is really, really interesting. Separate out development tasks that are need information intensive and only assign those to users. Let me illustrate what I mean. We're back to integrated circuits again. Now, this was a solution developed by two people, Mead and Conway. And it involved a re-architecting of integrated circuits. What integrated circuits used to be when they were full custom is you had to really know a lot about solid state physics and how to actually develop and build integrated circuits. In other words, you were mixing the knowledge that you had of physics and semiconductors with the customer's knowledge of what they wanted to do. What Mead and Conway did was they said, wait a minute now. We can never get our customers to do this design for us. It's just too darn hard if we just hand over the full integrated circuit design process. So what'll we do? And what they did was they said, this is two subsets of information. How to design what are called gates. So this stuff in blue, these are logic gates. And this is something that the semiconductor engineer uses his factory knowledge to design. So you design these gates, which are actually in silicon and which do and or and things like that operations using Boolean algebra. They said, look, we know that you can design anything you want, from artificial life to a dishwasher controller, using this sort of sea of gates. They might have 1 million gates like those blue ones. And notice they're all unconnected. What will we give to the user as a task? What we'll give to the user is the task of just connecting them to express the information that the user wants to do. So that's a much easier job. What you've done is you've said, no, I'm not going to hand over to you everything that I know because you'll never be able to do it. What I'm going to do instead is hand over some of the design task to you. And that is in the form of a toolkit. And that is using the language of Boolean algebra, which is not the language of physics, but it's the language that engineers knew who were the customers for these circuits. Okay, so that same principle, do you remember I told you, I think I showed you his design deck before. I'm not sure if I did or not, but anyway, here's another example. If you're a customer for a deck in your backyard, you can see that thing in the lower right. What do you know? You know what you want the deck to look like because you know your family patterns. You know if you want it to be large or small. You know if it should incorporate a lot of seating. You know whether it should have stairs. You know whether it should have a barbecue on it. All these things you know. And just like in the case of the Travelocity story, you know, if you were hiring an architect, that architect would have to ask you all this stuff. Well, you know, do you want this? What shape do you want it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is your lot line like? So we can know how big to make it. So what happened here? just like in the case of integrated circuits, the company, in this case Lowe's, said, wait a minute, there's underlying stuff about structural engineering that the customer doesn't have to know. Let's separate that out from the design of the deck itself. In other words, you see that thing on the left there. We can engineer, given the size of the deck that you have designed in terms of surface, we can engineer how big the structural timbers have to be. We can engineer how many piers you have to have holding this thing up, because that's all in the code, the building code, and structural engineering knowledge. So basically what we will do is we will automate everything that an architect has to know, and you don't have to know it. All you have to do, the way we enable you, the deck user, to focus only on your sticky information, is we take over all the other tasks. You just sketch out the deck. We will render what's on the left-hand side from what you sketched on the right, and we will give you a bill of materials. How many bags of cement you need, we'll pre-cut your lumber and do all the rest of this. And furthermore, you can learn by doing it, because once we run that for you and give you a custom report, you can say, holy moly, that's much too expensive. Let me try to make it smaller. Or, holy moly, I didn't realize that the following was the case. Let me try to do my end of the job again. And so you see here in another important element in what a toolkit does for you. Namely, it enables you to try and simulate your results cheaply, okay? It's a toolkit. And so what you saw back here with this thing, it not only says to you, here, design that thing, it then in simulation will run it for you so that you can see if the circuit does what you want before you invest in actually buying physical circuits. So it's a fabulous thing. It's a tool that depends on your knowledge. It incorporates the underlying standard knowledge that the manufacturer has to make a whole kind of a product. And what it does basically, again, as I said, the first task of doing a toolkit is it isolates the user information from the producer information, right? That's what it does for you. Now, let's see if I can give you another example. Here's another example. This is flavor design for the kinds of things that you buy when you buy a perfume and so on. What the manufacturer discovered was that the manufacturer knew in terms of chemistry how to develop something, but their customers were coming to them and saying, "Ah, I want something that tastes like the peach I ate in Alsace." And the chemists are like, "Yeah, what's that? It's sticky information. We don't know. You will, when you taste it, know if that's right, but we don't know." So what we'll do is we'll create a flavor design toolkit for you. Has no chemicals in it at all. If you look at these things there, it has your language, like flavor of cheesy, creamy, and so on. And you as the customer, you taste, you pull one of these levers to get yourself an increased amount of floral if you feel that's what you need, and you taste again. We keep all the chemistry knowledge to ourselves, and all we tell you, just as in the case of the previous toolkits, all we tell you is what it costs you. We can do it. What does it cost you? And that way you go ahead and you design it using our toolkit. Now, one underlying point here, again, You display only information the user needs to know. So one of the dimensions on that chemical toolkit, that flavor toolkit, was a dimension of taste called jamminess. Now, the user then has that little lever you saw there. You can pull on that thing to increase or decrease jamminess. Underneath, there's a supplier map that says, oh, okay, low jamminess, we can use flavor system A. But then it begins to taste burnt. If you crank up the jamminess, it begins to taste burnt. What do you do then? Well, you got to switch to flavor range B, which is much more expensive. So all the user sees is, wow, when I pull out on that thing, all of a sudden the price jumped up and says, oh, maybe I want to do something else. Maybe I can do something else about that. So just like here, again, if all of a sudden the deck is too expensive, the system is not telling you why it's too expensive. It's just saying, hey, your price is $3,000. And you say, oh man, I can only afford 1,000. What can I do to make it better? Okay, so now, here again is a discussion question, but I'd like to first get a few people conversing about this so we see whether we can actually do this, because this is a new one for me to try. I want you to think of a product type you know well. Well, maybe we'll hold on that. Let me go for. Are there any questions at this point? Do you get the idea? Tell me what you'd like.
Yeah, so we've got Georgia and Asim.
Okay,
in that
Georgia.
order.
Georgia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what users does this not work for? I imagine there might be people who really just, they don't want to be involved in this decision-making process at all, and they would be, I guess, happy with something that had been estimated for them, even if it's not perfect. And then in the case of the irrigation system for smallholder farmers, a lot of farmers are also learning irrigation techniques at the same time, so they don't even have the sticky information themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Necessarily.
Yeah, so you're wondering whether a toolkit would work there.
Yeah.
Is that right? Well, so for those of you who don't know, Georgia is working with some people in Africa who are making drip irrigation systems, right?
Yeah.
And what we've been talking about is, well, maybe there are some farmers out there who want different ones. So what you'd want to do is, you're not necessarily serving everybody with this. Some people are happy with the standard, that's just fine. It's what really, when you want to do this, you want to do it when there's a lot of variety in what people want. For example, in the case of trips, everybody wants a different trip. So you really couldn't say, well, there are 3 standard trips here. You can go to Georgia, as it were. You can go to San Francisco, or you can, that's it, right? You got 2 trips. Most people, would say, no, I have to tailor it. So you're absolutely right. The question would be whether there is a strong demand for variety in your market. If everybody's happy with the standard product, that's just fine. Okay?
Thanks.
You're welcome. So Viviana? I think Viviana, you raised a question, or you didn't?
Yeah, I think Asim was ahead actually, but then if
Oh,
we're going to go in first come, first serve, then it's Asim and Viviana.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Thank you. So the question that I had, Professor, was that when you're building these toolkits,
Sorry.
how do you
Sorry about that.
no worries.
Go ahead.
No worries. So when you're building these toolkits, I mean, how do you anticipate all the different combinations that the users can come up with? Because then the toolkit has to become very extensive, right? The behind the scenes to support all the user design requirements and all that. So is there some way to anticipate all of those, or the idea is to make it so generic and so versatile that it can accommodate all the user requirements very easily into the back end?
Well, that's a really good question as well. And what really happens is that the users who are lead users, who are ahead of the thing, force changes by doing it themselves.
Hmm.
So, and then the manufacturer follows. So for example, there are toolkits out there by Cadence for laying out integrated circuits and so on.
Mhm.
And they had a series of tests in that thing. And after every test, they would throw the data back into a database, is how the Cadence thing worked. So users at the leading edge of high speed, getting into the microwave area, started to discover that there was a problem that none of these tests were catching. Namely, that that closely spaced leads were doing crosstalk. So they said, oh hell, we got to fix that. And they fixed it. And then the manufacturer, as the thing became more general, sort of introduced it as a standard additional test. So you don't, it's a back and forth with your customers.
Right.
You don't have to anticipate. It doesn't become perfect at the start. It's something that you work through. Very good question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Jane, Boss Jane.
Oh, no, into the
Okay,
So-
thanks. I have a kind of a complex case. So I'm thinking about my own experience as a cyclist. There is a very diverse need among different sizes. Like me, I'm super petite. It's very hard. I've never had a bike that fits me. But then there are a lot of toolkits producers are offering. But the toolkits themselves are so difficult to use. Like there are different softwares and you need to do a very extensive bike fitting sessions. So there are these middlemen. So the local bike shop people. So they will do the fitting for you and try to help you to translate your needs and try to help you use those toolkits. Where should we place those middlemen in your in the paradigm? Where do we put them?
Yeah. In a sense, if you think about it, travel agents were middlemen too, right? And so if if the demand is high enough, you'll sort of simplify this by the process I just mentioned with the seam and so on, by learning, by doing and so on and back and forth. So it becomes easier and easier for people to use until eventually everybody can use it. But there's a cost to designing the toolkit. And if there's only a moderate amount of demand, then you might well end up with the middlemen like you talk about. So those middlemen probably have access to a toolkit also that is easier than the original bike designers have, but it's not yet ready for the layperson. Right? So it's a continuum depending upon the level of demand for the toolkit and the level of skill of the people that you have to meet. Okay, it's cool. There's a whole spectrum in society. I think it's very cool. But then I have strange taste. Who knew, right? Okay, is that anybody else, Jane, or are we good to go?
Eric, can I just interject for a moment?
Yes, Harry.
I'm just thinking about, this is not something that is only for the extremes. In fact, over time, this becomes the norm. And I'm thinking about paint stores. When you and I were kids and we went to the paint store with our father to get a can of red paint, they took the can of red paint off the shelf and handed it to us.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if we go to the paint store and ask for a can of red paint, they ask what color red. And they have these arrays of different colors of red. And you hand this little piece of plastic to a high school kid on the other side of the counter who magically produces this unique color red. So the concept of toolkit shouldn't be thought about, at least in my mind, as something for the extreme, because in fact, if you think about the economics of what the paint companies did in moving from pulling a can of red off to handing you any color you want, the transition is unbelievably large. So I just wanted to put that out.
That's a fabulous example. And in fact, it's a huge saving to the paint companies, right? Because
Yes.
you don't have to stock so many different pre-mixed paints. So there's a high incentive on the paint company side. And I think their toolkit was to give you a whole book of color swatches, right? That you could take home and hold up to your wall to decide what you wanted. Is that how it works? I can't.
Yeah, and then at the paint store, once
Mhm.
you've decided what color you want,
Yeah.
they make that color for you at the paint store.
I
That's
agree.
not-
But the
in effect-
toolkit, in a sense, from the customer's perspective, was the set of color swatches, I guess.
Right.
Because you couldn't go into that high schooler behind the counter and say, I want it sort of like red like this, but a little like that. You know, you couldn't do that, right?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
you can now.
Well, no, you have to show them a specific color of red that you're choosing, right?
A specific color, yes.
Yeah. And somehow you have to have a tool that helps you decide what that color is.
Yes, and somehow the high school kid has to have a tool that matches the expertise of a chemical engineer to give you that color.
Exactly. So that's the mixing process. I agree.
I'll now put myself on mute and try not to say anything else for the rest
No,
of the.
Harry, you are always essential to the discussion. No question. Thank you.
We've got 2 comments actually that came up in the chat that I think are quite nice. Sophie, do you want to share what you were writing, and then Prasad?
Oh, it's just a very short comment. I was just thinking that toolkits are actually a very good market research tool because we get a lot of data back what people really need. And for example, Threadless also lets people design their t-shirts with a toolkit, and the one that is desired the most is produced.
Yes. Yes. I mean, good point. And all of these have to do with somehow shifting design activities from you to the customer or the person who actually has the need. So absolutely right, Sophie. Yeah. Thank you.
And Eric, just a comment in from my area of bias. Going back to Harry's point, paint in cars also gotten just amazingly complicated. So I happen to have a car that's orange, but it's not orange. It's got some Sedona orange or something like that. And it turns out that the manufacturer has been given a toolkit by the paint supplier. And they then, and some basis colors. And of course, the manufacturer does the mixing and the composition based on a formula on site.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing goes on to the repair shops. And so, as things get used, there's feedback about what works better, what's more popular, what's easier to maintain, what, shows up as, hard to keep clean and so on and so forth. And so that toolkit evolves over time, and that becomes sort of almost like a secret formula, although there's a public side to it. But I think those really help with both efficiencies, and the paint manufacturers happy making basis paint, and setting toolkits or offering services around those toolkits.
Yeah, and transferring some of the design sort of knowledge and assessment, like it looks dirty or whatever, to you.
All that,
I agree. Now, the next thing is that, Jane, is there anybody else, or are we good?
Our team just came in with a quick question, if you want to take that.
Yeah, it was just I was posting it to the chat, as just a question. Doesn't deserve discussion in class.
It doesn't. Are you sure?
Yeah, actually, your discussion, Mr. made me think. There must be consultancies that do toolkit design for companies, and that just seems like an interesting and useful business.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these things are spreading now, but how to design them is tough. And we're going to get into that now. That happens to be a very good transition, Erdine, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So in addition to the basic idea of simplifying a toolkit by giving the user only what the user needs to know, that is something that has a direct bearing on sort of their use knowledge, there's another thing that you then do. Namely, you have to have tools built into the toolkit that allows you to do trial and error design that are user-friendly, offer the right solution space, libraries, and can translate from user language to producer language. So let me go briefly into each of those things now. So basically, you want to offer a solution space that covers the range that a user wants. So specifically, for example, with hairstyling, because there are hairstyling toolkits, you want to offer them, that is the user, the customer in the toolkit, you want to offer the full set of design options, variables, hair position, length, color, waviness, and so on, and tools offered, right? You want to give them a complete set of tools. Now, next, what you want to do is offer user-friendly languages and toolkits. Now, this is sort of funny. My daughter, who is now a postdoc at Berkeley, contributed this slide to me when she was very young and was using something called the Barbie hairstyler. And she was determined to be included in my slides, so I was delighted to do that. And here is a slide from Christiana. But what you see there on the right-hand side is how kids and also professionals design hair. What they have is they have a comb, brush, and all the rest of it on the side as tools. And then they give you, the customer, the way that you are accustomed to looking and assessing the style that you end up with. Now, let me go back. The point is, again, we were talking about sticky information and why you might want the customer to design something. And women especially who have particular concerns about hair and hairstyles will know that you go into a hairstylist and you say to that hairstylist something that, I want something business-like yet casual, right? And the hairstylist, of course, says exactly what you mean. Leave it entirely to me. And goes snip, snip, cut, cut, makes everything wet so you can't see whether he's on the right track or she's on the right track or the wrong track. And then in the end says, voila. And you look in the mirror, which is your assessment, and you say, you have ruined my life, right? So what's the problem there? It is that you could not express what you wanted in clear terms to the designer, so the designer sort of went off on their own. But you could not, in a toolkit, be expected to learn the manufacturer's language. So what the hairstylist knows about is things like layer cutting and the rest. You don't have to know about that. What you have to know about, you have your own language. So these toolkits should be designed in your language, not the manufacturer's language. And your language is looking in a mirror to see what you think. So you do a series of iterations. It will be your face in that thing instead of the face of a Barbie doll. And what you do is you'd experiment, and you can turn, you can turn your image around so that you can see the whole thing and so on. And you fiddle around until you're happy. Then you end up with downloading to the manufacturer, that is in this case the hairstylist, in the hairstylist's language, what you need, right? So if I go back for a moment, this is exactly equivalent to this. You are designing a flavor in your own language. Namely, it should not taste cheesy or fruity or whatever. That's your language. And then the answer that you arrive at when you're satisfied is translated into chemistry, which is the manufacturer's language. And that is passed then back to the manufacturer for implementation. So the idea in both of those things is there is a user-friendly language typically, because if you as a customer are in effect used to assessing what you like in your bicycle, whatever it might be, you have some internal way of saying good or bad without necessarily understanding the supplier's language. So for example, here I am in this room here. I might decide if this is, I might decide, well, I live here. And so what I would really like is the ceiling to be higher. So in a properly designed architectural toolkit, I would simply push up the ceiling. And the structural engineering program behind sort of my image would then say, well, okay, here's what it would cost you to do that. And, fine, we can do that. But here's what it would cost you. And maybe it would put a beam right through the center of your room or something like that. You say, well, maybe that's not a good idea. I'll go off. But again, it's got to be in your language, right? So you don't say to the customer, you're such a jerk, you don't understand our semiconductor knowledge. You say, how do you look at this thing? And in the case of semiconductors, you, the engineer who is applying semiconductors, understands Boolean algebra. That's how you do it. So you give the user their language and a toolkit in their language. Okay, now, next thing you do is you offer pre-designed modules, because custom designs are typically not totally unique. So what you really want is sort of modules and modifiable default designs so that users can design something that works for themselves. They don't have to stick to that list of things, but it's a convenience for them if you offer it. And so in the case of these hairstyle design toolkits, what they often have is a series of celebrity hairstyles, so that you can look at some particular hairstyle, say, oh, I want one that looks like Kate Middleton or something like that. And you can sort of then apply that hairstyle to your face and modify it rather than having to start with the hairstyle from zero, right? So modules are very helpful. Now, it's really interesting. Modules should make design sense to a user. And this is, again, interesting. Design sense from what a user does. So for example, I could look at a house in terms of designing an architectural toolkit. And I could say, well, all right, there's a module here that seems quite consistent over all these houses. And it consists of half a door and a portion of a roof. And I can supply that to you as a module. No, you can't. What you have to do is understand sort of the style of thinking about a house. Now, the way we found this out, it was really interesting, is we went into the design of, you'd be surprised at this, but pre-component toolkit for Mexican sauces. Now, companies, so Nestle makes vast amounts of sauces. And you may not know it, but places like Taco Bell and so on have executive chefs. You wouldn't know it because when you eat their stuff, it certainly doesn't taste like it, but they have executive chefs. Now, what the executive chefs used to do was they were trained in a culinary school. They would get exactly the right chilies from their backyard, and they would cook it up on their stove, their designer stove, and they would come up with something fabulous. And then they would send it to the manufacturer, Nestle, and say, make me something like this. Now, the manufacturer does not have a stovetop. the manufacturer, Nestle, makes this stuff by the ton. And they reap chilies by the multi-hundreds of acres. So what do? It doesn't taste the same when it's been run through a steam retort as it does when it's being cooked on your stovetop. So what they did was something very clever. And this is a toolkit again. It's not a digital toolkit, but it's a physical toolkit. What they did was they took all the ingredients commonly used in Mexican sauces, and they ran them through their production process as individual components. So they ran the chilies and made a chili puree that was done exactly through a steam retort. And they provided the chefs with a pouch containing that. Next, what happened was they did the same with all these other chili sauces and ingredients of these things and gave that to the executive chefs. Now, the executive chefs were able to use these components instead of their standard raw components, mix them up, and then they would send back the recipe showing the number of ingredients, and they could end up with precisely the same taste in mass production. So the idea is, again, it's you want to have the user's language, but you want to have that language express something in a way that it can then be translated into manufacturer language for production. And so that, again, is part of toolkit design, right? What you want is not somebody sort of coming up with a fantasy that can't be done in terms of haircutting, you know, nor a fantasy, namely a floating deck, right? With no visible means of support, because that can't be done either. So you need their language, but you have to be able to translate it into manufacturer language. And if it cannot be made, you have to tell the user so as part of the design feedback process, right? So when you're designing an integrated circuit, it will often say to you, no, you can't do that. Namely, the integrated circuits in our fabs cannot run as fast as you want them to run. So you got to figure out a way to make it different. Okay, so now, more general innovation design tools are out there, like AutoCAD and sort of SolidWorks, but really each of these kinds of toolkits today tend to have to be designed specific to a given product type. You know, one designed for paints, as Harry would say, really won't do the job for bicycles. So it is, as somebody was saying, a really important kind of a professional skill to try to convert what you are manufacturing into something that users can design for themselves in the way they want. So here's graphic design toolkits. There's a fair amount of breadth across all the graphics. You know, there are architectural toolkits. You can see specialized toolkits here in the upper corner where it's helping you to specifically design a house, for example. But the guy, what is his name? Frank Gehry, who designed these curve buildings. When he tried to use these CAD toolkits, he said, damn it, I can't design curve stuff in there. I need to make my own CAD toolkit to add in the ability to make curved panels. And so that then had to be done. And now it's a standard part of many of these kinds of CAD. Because again, the user pushes it. If there's a sufficient demand, that user does it for himself. And if that then becomes general, it becomes part of the standard manufacturer toolkit. Okay, then finally, what I mentioned earlier was toolkits must enable first time through error-free production, right? So in the case of the Nestle Mexican Sauces Toolkit, They had to figure out a way, not just to get you to design your own Mexican sauce, they had to figure out a way to translate your recipe into something that they could manufacture, which was exactly what you expected. Because making you a few tons of this stuff is not cheap, and you want to make it right the first time. And analogously, I know that Prasad, for example, works for Ford, and they give you toolkits to design your car. But what you'd really like is some kind of a performance thing so that you could sense whether you're going to get it or not, that something that you like, because if it's not what you like, you bought it, you know? So I don't know if you have any comments, Prasad, but in that case, it's not really a toolkit you can experiment with before you buy, is it?
Yeah, unfortunately not. It's, but I think what might, and what's really, as you know, from the number of studies that have been done, and we've spoken about this in our various discussions, is that people tend to modify cars as soon as they get them. Certain types of folks within certain types of cars or communities. And so you find a proliferation of a lot of things that are done within these communities, and often the manufacturer would warn them and say, you're on your own if you modify this or touch some other piece. But fans do it anyway, and then of course there's a whole system of toolkits that evolve around those modifications.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And by the way, there are a lot of, in effect, fake toolkits out there that seem to give you as a user choices, but they really don't. So for example, Dell will offer you the right, in a sense, they'll say, well, how much RAM do you want? Or how much disk space do you want? And the answer is, how the heck should I know, right? And so what you should be able to do with a Dell toolkit is say to them, listen, I want to run this program. And Dell will then cripple sort of a remote computer to do exactly what you're trying to do. And then it will say, well, if we run this program again with twice the RAM, you save, you know, it costs you $500, but you save 6 seconds per run. And then you can decide. But it doesn't do that. It simply says to you, what do you want? And you, being risk averse, say, oh, I guess I better get a lot. You know, how much RAM? A lot. And so you put down a lot, and they send it to you, and they're happy, and you're happy, but you weren't as economical as you could have been. So now again, what you do is you have to enable the user to do trial and error problem solving. That's what a really good toolkit does. It says, design something, model it, run it, and analyze it. So in the case of the deck toolkit, what that means is design your design. You can look at it visually and see if that's what you want. And then we will run the cost of it for you. We will give you the price of that thing that you just designed, and you can rethink if you want. Right? In the case of the flavor design toolkit, it was, you know, if you think you want this, we'll make it for you like that in an experiment, and you can sniff it or taste it and see and modify very cheaply, right? So it's always trial and error problem solving built into a toolkit. Same thing with you back in the Travelocity story. You say, I think I want to go to Utah on day 3, and then I want to go visit Uncle Sid in Seattle on day 4, and it sort of puts together the possible flights, and you say, oh no, that's just not going to work. Let me try again, without your actually having to fly to an airport and end up stuck. Okay? Now, what I propose we do is now let me go back to my second problem discussion question for you. And what I propose you do, and this is again hard for you and hard for anybody, manufacturers are very used to the idea that they do it for you. So if you are within a manufacturer, if you've been, and I assume you've all had some experience with a manufacturer or with some kind of product type, what the manufacturer does is say, well, no, the customer simply doesn't know enough to do whatever the hell, is required. So what I would like you to do, just to trial it, just to get it into your heads, is think to yourself about these sort of steps in toolkit design. Namely, and sort of maybe note this down for yourself, try to figure out what the customer really has to know to design a special product for themselves, right? What do they have to know? To design a trip for themselves on an airplane, they don't have to know how an airplane flies. They don't have to know aerodynamics. They simply have to know how to get into the plane and sit down. So, and again, always the user will have a design-friendly language that they use anyway to try to cope for themselves, as in the hairstyling example. So don't say, there's too much for the user to do, and don't say, they don't understand anyway the marvelous things I understand. Try to think to yourself, and Viviana, for you, it might be the bicycle story. Try to think to yourself, what would a toolkit do that in fact would make it easier for the customer to customize what they want? So let's try this, and it will take you, I would say, why don't we try 12 minutes for this, okay? Again, choose something you're very familiar with, hopefully from the manufacturer side and the user side. Figure out how you could transform more design to the user, okay? That's your challenge. You won't do a necessarily brilliant job at it, but my goal is that you'll play with the variables enough to sort of embed them more solidly in your thinking.
In the Japanese beverage company to develop the new recipes. So I usually use a lot of flavor to develop the new brand. So, and to accelerate the product development, I asked the flavor house to give me the flavor toolkit. So for example, the citrus flavor, 35 library of the flavor or something. But it is very difficult to create the new flavor because the flavor house language and my company's language is totally different. So flavor house have a, for example, in citrus, even in citrus, they have a, for example, lemon or grapefruit, the orange, not only in orange sweet or the sour or something. But in my company's language is only the sweet or sour, that's it. So it's a little very big gap between the provider, producer, and the customer. So
yeah. Yeah. And so you would like a toolkit that enabled you to make things custom for your company.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, if you keep buying, it's not necessarily in the interest of the supplier to give you one, right?
Yeah.
They'd be happy to sell you standard things. So, I mean, one of the issues here is, fine, even if you want something like that, because you would like unique products, you would like them quicker, somehow or other, you have to then sort of sort out the economics and create the pressure to do what you want. So thank you for that, Yoji. Okay, anybody else?
We thought of a,
sorry, go ahead.
Can I go? Okay.
Yes.
So, I mean, our group shared a lot of interesting ideas. One idea was about universities being kind of like toolkits based on what people want to study, and mix and match, that kind of stuff. And another crazy one we came up with was about designing a baby. Like if you want to have a baby, as women are, pursuing their careers and the ladder of success, sometimes they have babies later on. Can you hear me? Yeah. And so many women also go for like IVF and they can kind of get a donor and sperm donor, and they kind of can design a baby, like maybe increase the probability of having the baby have a certain design in terms of their physical and intellectual caliber.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I mean that is certainly going to come at some point, but yeah, it's a fraud issue, isn't it? Yeah. Well, okay. So unless Erdine, was there somebody from your group, or shall we
Yes,
just?
Eric, you know, we had a very good discussion. I kind of caught myself having a frustrating time because it's not so easy to think of how to design a good toolkit. You know, you laid it out very nicely and you gave good examples and you gave a very good how-to as to how to do it. But then we thought about it in the context of Georgia's example. She's thinking about, well, how to design a toolkit for smallholder farmers in Africa. And then I asked a question about, well, how could you design a toolkit for students or prospective students, how to redesign a master's degree, which is something that's of great interest to us at MIT.
Mhm.
And really, it's just not obvious, you know, how to do that. And I found myself struggling.
Yeah, it's very hard. In other words, you know, it's like everything else, like lead users and so on. It's going in that direction. And what we do is we sort of see areas where it's very successful, like the deck toolkit, and then we try to generalize from there. So it's sort of new knowledge, but it's well established in specific areas. And you're absolutely right. When you go to a new area like designing a master's degree, it's a new creative process.
Yeah.
Right, but what we can really say to you is the economic advantages of doing it, and that it is sort of something worth trying to do. Like there's Yogi, you know, I showed you in the flavor example that it's possible to do those toolkits.
Yeah,
so you could in principle bring it into that company. Yeah.
I caught myself thinking, well, this makes sense. Why doesn't everyone else do it? Why don't more companies do it? And then I realized why, because it's not trivial.
A, it's not trivial. B, if, as in Yogi's case, he'll buy from them the standard stuff, why should they bother?
Yeah.
Right? It's the things that trigger this is pain in the manufacturer in part. Like, for instance, trying to have a bunch of people who are travel agents. That is so costly that if there's a way to automate that process, it helps the manufacturer and the user. So, you know, do universities benefit from creating very flexible master's degrees? Not necessarily. It may well be that the standard thing is what they want to do. So there's got to be pressure from the market or pressure from students or something like that to induce it.
Or a global pandemic.
Yes, yes. Arranged obviously for the purpose of developing toolkits. So yeah. So, okay. So anyway, now you know about this, and just like everything else I've told you in this course, these are new areas because the phenomenon of user innovation is getting stronger and stronger. And so in each of these areas, you have to be pioneers. It's not cut and dried where you can just pick it up and do it. Your generation, in effect, is going to sort of affect this change more broadly and make it into conventional wisdom and conventional practice. But right now it isn't. You know, if you go to your company and you say, I think we ought to help the customers design, they'll say, I don't think so, no, you know? So I hope you get the understanding, however, of why it's going to happen. So, all right, let's conclude for today then, and thank you very much. See you next
Oh,
week.
Eric, just before we sign off, I wasn't sure if you wanted to circle back to the comment that Willem had made earlier about the House of
Okay,
Quality.
Willem, make it again. Willem?
He's still on.
Hi, Eric. Yes. So, so connecting features, designing features with customer wishes, desires, made me think of this QFD or House of Quality design mechanism, where you try to connect those attributes with benefits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it made me think of that in going through that systematically.
Yeah.
I understand now expressing the benefits and translating that is more of a challenge.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. The House of Quality is sort of this breaking up of features and benefits. And then the added thing that a toolkit does is give the design ability to the user, right? So yeah, so absolutely right. Thank you.
Thank you for a great class.
Yeah, you're so welcome. All right, Jane, do you see anybody else, or are we set?
Nope, I think we are all set. Going once, going twice.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.